So hello everyone, and welcome to week 7 of the QMC workshop. Thanks for joining. So today it's a pleasure to welcome 3 speakers from the broader QMC community as a change from the various introductory and example materials we've had for the last few weeks. And just actually as a quick reminder, next week we'll be covering new developments in spin orbit in quantum Monte Carlo, and then next steps for the workshop. And today, as previously, we'll be fielding questions from the chat, so put questions in there as we go along. And we can also unmute people if you put a note about that in your question. We'll handle questions mostly after each talk, and also as previously, we'll have a short break after the first talk. So on that note, it's a pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Professor Claudia Filippi is a professor in the Faculty of Science and Technology at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, and she's very well known for her contributions in quantum Monte Carlo over many years, both highly impactful new methods and also applications. And also recently, she's the leader of the TREX project, a European Center of Excellence focused on targeting real chemical accuracy at exascale with stochastic methods. So welcome, Claudia, and I'll stop sharing now and you can go ahead.
Well, thank you, Paul, for the very kind introduction. So let me try to share now. See, what before. Now, 1 second. Okay, do you see it full screen now?
Yes, we do, and we hear you well. So go ahead.
Very good. Okay, so well, thank you very much for the invitation and to speak. This is a lecture series. So I will present some work we've been doing on excited states and also discuss well, optimization method, variational principle. So a bit of everything. Okay, so let's see. So first of all, I didn't know where I was entering in the series of lectures. So a quick recap of why we want to do in Fourier space quantum Monte Carlo. Okay, so that's going to be the focus also of my lecture. So we're having a favorable scaling. If you're looking the energy per Monte Carlo step, you're having order n to the 4th. We're having flexibility in the choice of the wave function, easy parallelism, and we can really provide, quite accurate calculation for medium to large systems, also extended systems. And these, let's say, these techniques are routinely used for molecules up to 100 atoms. I would say mainly first and second row, and that's one example of something rather large from the group of Dario Alfvén, and still a few years ago where they were trying to benchmark van der Waals interactions and various DFT. Okay, so there's already a question in the chat, I see, but I hope there is no. Is there a problem with the presentation?
No, that was just me asking for people to put questions in the chat.
Okay, very
Carry
good.
on.
Okay, so I understand that so far what you've seen is a variational Monte Carlo, to compute expectation values, wave function optimization in the form of the linear method to find the optimal parameters for a given wave function, and fixed node diffusion Monte Carlo, okay, which finds the best solution for a given trial wave function, with the same nodes as a given trial wave function, and therefore removes at least partially the wave function bias coming from the choice of the wave function. Okay, so here we are going to talk about excited state, and of course, question is whether diffusion Monte Carlo is variational. And what we know is that diffusion Monte Carlo is indeed variational for the ground state and for the lowest state, let's say in each symmetry class. Okay, so if you're doing a singlet of a given symmetry class, a triplet, you're going to be variation, okay? But if you're really doing a real excited state, so that's not the lowest in a symmetry class, the only thing is that you're having the exact solution if you're having the exact nodes, okay? So you may expect, that the impact of the nodes will be maybe even more relevant, for excited states, okay? So, wait, oopla, sorry. So, since diffusion Monte Carlo, removes part of the wave function bias, we may hope to have solved all of our problems. Of course, the results still depend on the choice on nodes. Okay, so and the question is how much do they depend on this choice, and therefore, can we really use diffusion Monte Carlo as a black box approach? Okay, so here I'm going to try to answer the question. There are some positive answers and some more, let's say, some situation where you need to do a bit more work. Okay, so this is some a bit old work on the atomization energy for the G2 sets by Petruzziello, Toulouse, and Umriger. And what I'm showing here is the mean average deviation for the atomization energy on this set of molecules. Okay, so these are diffusion Monte Carlo calculation for different wave function. Okay, in this case, we are using a single determinal. They are using a single determinal wave function where they do not optimize the orbital, and they're having a mean average deviation of 3.1 kilocalorie per mole. Now, if they stick to a single determinant, but they optimize the orbitals, in addition to the Jastrow factor, they actually reduce the error from 3 to 2 kilocalorie per mole. Then what you can do, you can add determinants. You can construct what we call a complete active space in the valence space. So you're adding, some orbitals to which you consider excitation. You consider all possible excitation in this orbital set of a limited number of electrons. Okay, so these are quite, let's say, still small wave function where they optimize, Jastrow, orbital, and determinantal parameter. You're really, going down with your error. You're actually below couple cluster single and double parenthesis triple with a very large, augmented quadruple, quintuple basis. So what you can see here is that with some effort on the wave function, you can really do rather well. Okay, so another example of quick success is, for instance, the non-covalent interaction energy for 9 compounds of the S22 sets. Okay, so this is really diffusion Monte Carlo with a very standard, let's say, procedure. You build, bit slip orbital on a given basis set, and they are comparing against CCSDT in the complete basis set limit. Okay, and even here you're having let's say a very good result, very small error compared to couple cluster. Okay, and sorry, I'm trying to remove the zoom, which is in the middle of the screen. One moment. And so you have a very small error with, what I would say is practically no effort on the wave function. So it's really a black box approach. Okay, you can really do quite well. Now, a situation where the black box approach really fails is, for instance, the computational excitation energy of this molecule. Now, this is a cyanine dye, it's a cation. We are looking at pi to pi star excitation. And here what I'm showing is the vertical excitation energy as a function of different wave functions. Okay, so the full points are variational Monte Carlo results. We are optimizing all parameters in the wave function at the variational level, and diffusion Monte Carlo is done on top of this wave function. Okay, the excitation energy is computed, and every time you are systematically improving compared to variational Monte Carlo, but you are still, quite far away with respect to, the reference data, which are coupled cluster or extrapolated full CI, and the scale is quite large. Okay, so what is this is telling you, I'm going to get back to discuss what the wave function actually are later. What is telling you that is diffusion Monte Carlo is not a panacea. I mean, you need to work. Okay, you can get very good results by doing some effort in how you choose your wave function and actually in optimizing it all at the variational level. Okay. So now, so optimization and choice of wave function is important, but if you're looking in the literature, you will find, a lot of total energy calculation, mainly, let's say, ground state calculation. Okay, and often, let's say, it is done on borrowed geometries, computed at the level of density functional theory, and also with borrowed wave function. You do a CAS, you do a DFT, and then you put a Jastrow, you optimize the Jastrow factor. And the question is, why so hard for us to compute energy derivatives? I'm going to explain you a bit, where the complication comes from. Okay, and the point is, if you're doing, forces in a, let's say, straightforward manner, you will get a much larger cost with respect to the energy. You will go up by at least a factor of n, from n to the 4th to n to the 5 per Monte Carlo step. What I will present here, at least, are recent developments. At least, we're going to show that it's possible to compute, many derivatives also for wave functions with many, many determinants as efficiently as the energy. And therefore, we are really in a position to optimize the energy of the ground and excited state with respect to parameter or also structural parameters. Okay, and I will show some results later. So, as I said, let me show you why computing interatomic forces is somewhat more complicated than in, for instance, in functional theory. Okay, so as you learned, you can compute your energy by taking the expectation value, by averaging along your path the local energy. Now let's assume you want indeed the interatomic forces, so you're taking the derivative of these with respect to the nuclear coordinates, which we call alpha. Okay, so you're going to get the derivative of the local energy in red, and then by taking the derivative of the distribution, which is the wave function squared, you get this additional term. Okay, now if you focus on the red term, you will have the derivative of the Hamiltonian, that's your Hermann-Feynman contribution, and then you're going to have an extra term, which has in principle zero expectation value. So you are carrying along in your integration something which integrates to zero. Okay, and the last term is actually the Poulet term. Okay, so why keeping 3 terms, which cost you more, instead of 2 terms? Well, the point, if you're keeping all 3 terms, such an expression has much lower fluctuation, and actually in the limit of the exact wave function will also have zero variance. Okay, so the point is, if you're looking for the wave function being optimized and becoming better and better also in its choice and approaching, for instance, an eigenstate, you will have the local energies constant. So the green term will be, let's say, so EL is constant equal to the energy, and the green term will be zero, point by point. Now the derivative with respect to the nuclear coordinate of the local energy, if also the derivative of your wave function are correct, will also be a constant. And therefore, you're only going to need one, let's say, Monte Carlo step to actually sample your expectation value. Okay, so again, of course, you don't have the ground state, but as we improve our wave function by keeping this term, we are actually lowering the fluctuation and the computation of the forces. But as we see, this requires to compute the Hamiltonian acting on the derivative of the wave function with respect to the nuclear coordinates. And that's where the cost, actually, the additional cost comes in. Okay. So indeed, so if you're writing down this low variance estimation of the interatomic forces, you will need the wave function in the sampling process, the local energy, and the derivative of the energy, so the derivative of the wave function and the derivative of the local energy. And the same is true if you're doing wave function optimization, and for instance, using the linear method, you will actually need the derivative of the wave function with respect to the parameter and the derivative of the local energy with respect to the parameter, since what you will need is the Hamiltonian acting on the derivative of the wave function with respect to the parameter. Okay, and all of this is quite costly if done in a straightforward manner. Now, a few years ago, what we have done is we have introduced a simple formalism, which amounts to rewriting the local quantities which enter in the computation of the forces. Okay, and in particular, these allow you to actually obtain a very efficient computation of the wave function, the local energy, the derivative of the wave function, and the derivative of the local energy. And this can be done also for multideterminantal wave function in such a way that the cost of the derivatives per Monte Carlo step is the same as the cost of computing the energy alone. Okay. So here I'm showing the actual result. So we are having here, we're having, some polyenes. So we're going from, I think, butadiene, so is, 4 carbon atoms to something which contains 60 carbon atoms and a bunch of hydrogen. Okay, and what I'm plotting here is the cost of computing the energy as well as the forces, the interatomic forces, with respect to the cost of computing the energy alone. Okay, so we are increasing the system size, we are plotting, the cost, and on the x-axis, what we are doing is we're increasing the number of determinants in the just translated wave function. Okay, so we're going from 1 to something like 10,000. And what you're having at the cost is actually limited, is about 3 times, almost 3 times with respect to the cost of computing the energy alone. Okay. So here what I'm showing instead is same type of system. We're going from butadiene, so C4H6, to something containing 60 carbon atoms, but we are keeping the wave function to be single determinant for simplicity. But what's happening is that your number of parameters, of course, grows, your system grows. And again, we are plotting the cost of computing the derivatives of the wave function, as well as the Hamiltonian acting on the wave function, with respect to the cost of computing the energy alone. And again, you're having, that to compute all these quantities which are needed in your wave function optimization, you're still below, let's say, a factor of 4 with respect to the cost of the energy alone. Okay, so this is this is great, so we implemented it, so and we demonstrated it now, and also this really allows us, to really explore new territories, because we can compute derivatives for many parameters and determinants. And in combination with a toolbox of optimization tools, we can really start to treat quantum Monte Carlo as internally consistent, both as regards geometry and at least wave function parameters. So we can assess what are the real strengths of the method, independently on whether you use a Hartree-Fock or a Bissell-Heap determinant. And we can also really explore, that's what, let's say, at least interests me very much, what is the performance of QMC for excited states. So, so as I said, indeed, let's say our interest in recent years has really been, to establish quantum Monte Carlo as a reliable method for excited state. And, is a very good, in some sense, place, niche in some sense for QMC, because really excited states are even harder than ground state, so even describing absorption is often quite complicated. And here what I'm showing is thiophene. It's a small molecule, is a pi to pi star excitation, is the vertical excitation energy, and here are all correlated calculations. So on this side, you're having multi-reference PD2 calculation, CAS-PD2, different flavor of NEF-PD2. This is QMC, variational diffusion, different type of wave function, and couple cluster, okay? And the whole spread is 0.5 eV, which is large. I mean, these are correlated calculation, but this is really not an unusual situation, okay? And indeed, if you're coming with quantum Monte Carlo and you want to sell quantum Monte Carlo to the chemist to do excited state, you need to convince them they were actually good. And in recent years, there's been really a surge of benchmarking studies, really using higher and higher level approaches, couple cluster to very high level, full CI QMC, some of these, and the main focus has really been on absorption and fluorescence. And for instance, a technique which is very much used, to compare, excitation is a couple cluster. This is 3, is an approximate couple cluster to third order. Okay, and this type of approach is quite good to describe excitation which are single, okay? And for this type of single excitation, you kind of reach an accuracy which is less than 0.03 eV, and that also puts a barrier, something we also must be able to reach in quantum Monte Carlo. I would like to point out, however, that if you use this technique to study double excitation, you might be off by 1 eV. Okay, so as I said, excitation energies are difficult to describe, also for correlated method. So generally speaking, what you're having stronger correlation than in the ground state. And moreover, often, you have many phenomena, and you need to describe, different potential energy surfaces with uniform accuracy, okay? You might have absorption, fluorescence, intersystem crossing. You might have, a conical intersection between the first excited state and the ground state. And, so this is quite a complex picture. And in particular, actually relaxing on the excited state is quite difficult to do. Especially because time-dependent density functional theory often fails if you're really very far away from from present like a minimum if you're approaching, you know, regions like this where you have a crossing between states. So you don't have many methods available and suitable, for example, to study, you know, photochemistry. There are relatively few approaches you can actually use, and therefore it would be very nice if QMC would be, you know, one of them. So now, as I said, you know, so we want to do QMC in excited stage. We can optimize the geometry, the wave function, but still we need to choose a wave function, okay? And, you know, from what you can guess, you know, so far, we're going to also here use just translator wave function. So we are having a JASTRO correlation factor depending on the inter-electron coordinate, in addition to, you know, electron nucleus coordinates. And then you're also having an expansion in Slater determinants, okay? And now we can try to answer, you know, whether how complicated this determinantal expansion must be, you know, and, you know, how many determinants we need to have, and whether, you know, once we've done all the work in Variational Monte Carlo to optimize all the parameters, maybe, you know, diffusion Monte Carlo is no longer even needed, okay? So we can actually start to try to answer this question. Now, if you're doing excited stage, what you would like to do, you would like to have a balanced description of the states which are involved in your excitation, okay? And something that the chemists use is a complete space type of wave function, okay? So if you're taking a cyanide dye and you want to look at a pi to pi star excitation, you know, you might say, okay, fine, I have you know, 4 pi electrons in my reference, in my Connection determinant, and then I can, the smallest number of pi orbital I can involve in my excitation are actually 3. I can be this HOMO minus 1, HOMO and LUMO. Okay, and then what I can do, I can build all possible excitations, so that's a CAS, a complete space, all possible excitation in this small space of 3 orbitals, okay, and 4 electrons in 3 orbitals, and I have 5 determinants. And then what I can do, I can start to add, you know, carbon atoms, and the chain becomes longer and longer. The number of electrons, and I'm only keeping the pi electrons, you know, grows, and the number of minimal orbital I can keep also grows. You know, here I have CN11, I have 12 pi electrons and 11 orbital you can build in some sense out of the 2 PZ coming out of the plane, okay? And we are already at something like 100,000 determinants, okay? And it really grows very, very fast, exponentially. So the problem here is, of course, is we're only correlated a subset of the electrons. I decided to correlate the pi electrons. What about the sigma? And a subset of orbitals. And moreover, if you, at the end of the day, if you're using it in QMC, you're going to have to truncate it. And this will lead to some uncertainty. You know, have I included what I want to include? And maybe, you know, this CAS includes more things that we want, also thanks to the presence of the JASTRO factor. So what we've been looking, you know, in the last 2-3 years is actually to use a different scheme to build the determinants in our JASTRO Slater wave function. And we are using select SCI, which is an automatic approach which does not rely on my chemical intuition, which might not be there, to actually generate, you know, the expansion in determinants. Okay, the idea is you start from a small space, you know, for inside here, and then, you know, the Hamiltonian will bring you aside, connect you to the single and the double, and you're keeping essentially the determinants which have a significant contribution in perturbation theory at the second order. Okay, so this is their second order PT2 a contribution to the energy. Okay, so and you're growing your space, you're growing your space and including more and more determinants, and you can try to extrapolate to the full CI limit. That's at least what people do in this type of approach in select CI. So here what I'm showing is a CI energy, no QMC here, and what is plotted in the x-axis is the total PT2 energy, or the determinant you're actually adding. And as your expansion becomes larger, your PT2 correction goes to 0. And therefore you can actually extrapolate at the full CI limit. Okay, we are not going to want to go to the full CI limit, and we really hope, you know, to be able to actually stop over here with a relatively large PT2 correction and therefore small number of determinants, which, however, you know, capture the most important chemistry of your system. So now here we go back to the plot I showed before, discussing it a bit more. And indeed, I'm showing, the cyanide dye. So is indeed one of these small, 5 heavy atoms, and the vertical excitation energy. Okay, of course, what you would like to be able to get by with using, a single determinant in the ground state and doing a homo-lumo, for instance, in the excited state. Is a pi to pi star excitation, predominantly homo-lumo, and you may say, well, that's what I would like to do. You optimize all the parameters, and you're up here. Okay, so you're at 5.2 EV, and your best result is less than 4.9, and that's really not good. Okay, diffusion Monte Carlo helps you, but not enough. Okay, it doesn't bring you down between, in proximity of your reference. Then you can say, well, I have singles, the VNC worsen, DNC, okay, keeps it stable, and then I go to cis-Cas, where I choose the pi orbital, I put more pi orbitals, 6 pi, 610, I put the pi and sigma, and the number of determinants grow and grow. And here I'm actually, I think we're actually even truncating, okay? And the VNC, yeah, sure is improving, the DNC also a little bit, but we are kind of stuck, so we're essentially correlating the set of orbitals which are most close to the HOMO, okay? So, these are the valence orbital. Maybe there is something up there you haven't considered, which the CIPSI can actually probe in this, expansion in this determinanta space, okay? And indeed here what I'm showing a much more compact wave functions. This is 1,000 determinants, for ground and excited states, and we go up to 18,000. But we can see the variational and diffusion Monte Carlo now are very close to each other. Okay, that's the excitation energy. Okay, and we are also extremely close, to the best results in the literature. So the wave function is compact, and the result is accurate. So here I'm looking at we're looking at two other examples. These are still small, but there were some results reported in the literature which were not satisfying, and so we kind of revisited them. So this is formaldehyde and thioformaldehyde, so that's an N2 pi star excitation. And again, here we are showing the number of determinants, vertical excitation energy, VNC full symbol, DNC empty symbols. You can see the VNC and DNC are very close, and they are in very good agreement within chemical accuracy, so 0.05 EV. With respect, the whole scale here is 0.6 EV, 0.06 EV. We are in very good agreement, with the best reference which are out there. And indeed, here what you can see that, with all the work done at the variational level, diffusion Monte Carlo is not even needed. So, of course, as I said, we are not extrapolating our energies, okay? So we are really computing an excitation energy, and the way we are doing it is to build, expansions which are balanced for the states of interest, okay? And we decide, what balance means at the level of constructing the expansion, okay? So usually we use expansion which either have the same CI variance or the same PT2 correction, meaning the same error estimate, let's say, of the error with respect to the full CI. Okay, so therefore you hope you have a good cancellation of errors, since the wave function have, for different states, a similar quality. Moreover, what we do, we optimize all parameters, just through CI and orbitals in the just associated wave function, and we are within chemical accuracy with compact wave function, which is few thousand. And moreover, we don't need to perform a diffusion Monte Carlo, okay? And indeed, often we're also using, in addition to the extrapolation with the determinants, we are using the closeness of VNC and DNC to figure out whether our wave function is in fact good enough, or whether we are really still missing some ingredient, okay? Now, what we can do also, now having this protocol, we can also relax. We can excite a molecule and relax it in the excited state, okay? By building, along, this relaxation path, wave functions, which are, let's say, of balance, similar accuracy for all states and all geometries involved. And this is a result. So, and what I'm showing, okay, we're still having few systems, but let's say that's formaldehyde, thioformaldehyde, thiophene. So as a result of excitation, these molecule react, okay? So, this one buckles, here, the bond stands. Also, this one, you're having, the sulfur comes out of the plane. And what we're doing here, we are actually following the excited state and optimizing in the excited state. So we are computing the mean average deviation on the bond length and comparing to, well, let's say, to a reasonable technique available, that's CASPT2. And we are always, so we are red. Okay, so we are the red, green is CC3. And then these are two different cheaper techniques which you might find in the literature, okay? And we're always within a 0.01 angstrom. Are there questions, or I see a chat, there is another.
Oh, yes, there is one from Anwar Benali.
Very good. Hello.
In the selected CI calculations, it seems like CC3 is more accurate than FCI. Do you have a feel for why that is the case?
What do you mean more accurate? Well, you don't have to be variational. Can be below, can be above. It's an excitation energy. No, sorry, he has to answer. He cannot speak, I guess.
Well, actually, I can fix that.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so you're asking which one can we trust more of the two? Whether you can trust full CI, extrapolated full CI. Well, okay, this is done with a given basis. Now, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I think it's an augmented double, an augmented triple. I must double check. I mean, these are tiny things. It's a 0.0. What is it? It's a 0.015 EV.
Hi,
so
Claudia.
Is this what you're asking? Hello, Anwar. Sorry.
Oh, you can hear me. Fantastic.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It's just by intuition, we would have expected that the full CI energies would be the more stable, or the energy to meet. I understand that these are vertical excitations, but can you do you know which one to trust in this case? In the sense, do you trust the FCI result or do you trust the CC3 result?
Well, okay, at this level of accuracy, honestly, I don't worry so much. You know what I mean? It's like, take a thioformaldehyde is a 0.01. I didn't ask myself the question, which one I trust more. I mean, extrapolated full CI has also an error in the extrapolation. I would assume it's very small here. Presumably, we should trust the extrapolated full CI if the base is large enough, I would say, given the size of the system. But really, seriously, let's say a 0.01 EV.
Of course, it's just that by couple cluster practitioners will always trust more couple cluster results. But I was just wondering if you had personally a feel about which one you would trust more, CC3, since it's also an approximation of couple cluster.
Of course.
I was curious as to that. Also, how do you trust how converged your ground state and your excited state are compared to each other? Because being able to have compensation of error is one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, so yes, we are not extrapolating the energies.
Okay.
We are not extrapolating. This is a recipe. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a recipe. You say, okay, fine. Actually, in this system, in thiophene, in this system, the excited and the ground state have different symmetries. So, you expand. You set your, I think this was the PT2, but also the sigma square were comparable. You set, a target PT2, and you expand your excited state to the same target PT2. That's it, okay. And then you use them.
So you're basically.
So it's a recipe.
Okay, so you're following the PT2 for both the ground state and the excited state, and as long as you're at constant PT2, you're considering it. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, or and I mean, for the small molecule, you cannot, matching the PT. So essentially, we are matching the PT2 or matching the variance. And for small molecule, that's equivalent. For larger molecule, we don't find it equivalent. And one recipe might give you at the level of CI a faster convergence than the other. Fortunately, QMC seems to be able to actually cure these differences depending on which criterion we are actually following.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Now I lost, no, that's good that you interrupted. Okay, so I was here, okay? So I think I was here. So, okay, I would say that this is quite good. You know, we are having, you know, mean average deviation of which is less than 0.01 angstrom. And again, you know, it's always done, you know, following the gradient on the excited state and building a ground state to which the excited state is orthogonal of the same quality, okay, along all the geometry paths. And same quality means either iso same PT2 or same variance, okay? And so now what we have been doing now more recently is try to go to larger system, okay? So here, what we are doing against the CIPSI recipe, which of course, you know, becomes more costly as the system becomes larger. And what we are considering again are cyanin dyes going from 3, let's say, heavy atoms, so it's here to 19 heavy atoms, okay? And the 0 is actually the diffusion Monte Carlo. The green full symbols are again, you know, variational Monte Carlo, and this is CC3. Okay, so we are, you know, CC3, you know, for Cs, you know, is mainly, as I said, a single excitation. I'm very surprised it's so difficult to describe actually, for all types of techniques. But you know, so a couple cluster and diffusion Monte Carlo are very close to each other, well within, you know, chemical accuracy. And with couple cluster, we were actually able to only go until CM15 because of memory reasons, okay? While we said we are actually pushing our diffusion Monte Carlo larger, which is always in very good agreement with the variational counterpart as regards, you know, excitation energy. So what also is interesting is that sometimes we find that for this system, actually converging the excitation energy is somewhat more difficult than for the longer system. Actually, we need more determinants in the smaller one than for the larger one, and which is somewhat, we find somewhat surprising, but that's the way it is. You know, so as we go larger, we don't, you know, beyond a certain size, we don't need to dramatically increase the number of determinants to converge the excitation energy. Okay, so now we talked about optimizing the wave function in the excited stage, and our method of choice is energy minimization, okay? So, of course, if the states have different symmetries, easy, you just do your ground state, your excited stage, and if they have the same symmetry, you can either do state average optimization, that's what we have been doing until very recently, meaning we build multiple wave functions for all the states, and these wave functions have different CI coefficients, but they share the same Jastrow factor and the same orbitals, okay? So the linear basis, you know, Jastrow's later is the same, okay? And what you do to actually optimize the Jastrow determinant, you try to find a compromise between the states, okay? So you minimize the state average energy with some weights. Usually we don't play with them, 0.5, 0.5, for the states of interest, okay? And the CI coefficient will ensure orthogonality between the stage. Alternatively, you know, Ataca and Wagner and collaborators have actually recently, you know, applied this specific optimization also in energy minimization by just adding an orthogonality constraint as done also in other techniques. So maybe though I'm running out, but like so okay. So as I said, energy minimization is our choice for all what I presented, and then, you know, if you decide, you know, what to optimize, you still need to decide how you optimize it, okay? Which algorithm? Here for the system I show, we have between 50,000 and 100,000 parameters, and what we have been using is a stochastic reconfiguration method proposed by Sorella. And what you're doing is you build the gradient with respect to your parameters, and then you're following, of course, minus the gradient with some, you know, damping parameter. But instead of having the Hessian like you will have in a Newton method, you're having some sort of poor man Hessian, which is related to the overlap of the derivative of the wave function with respect to the parameter. Okay, and it's possible to actually implement a low memory version of conjugate gradient to actually go to very large number of parameters. And this is actually so far been our method. Okay, so I understand that in your previous lecture you also have seen the linear method. Okay, where you compute an overlap, but you also compute, you know, the Hamiltonian sandwich between the derivatives, okay? And there is also a low memory implementation of phase, but what we find is that even though is in principle should have a faster convergence, for instance, for the optimization of the adjuster that's given, we find that once you actually start to move a determinantal parameter, a stochastic configuration is much more robust to noise, okay? And that's therefore our technique of choice so far. Of course, if you add more and more parameters, eventually, I'm afraid the gradient only methods which will be really the way to go. But so far, DSR has been quite robust for what we needed. Now, therefore, okay, so therefore we optimize all the parameters. We are doing state average or state specific optimization of the energy using stochastic configuration, but you can also say we use a different variational principle. Why not? You know, so why the energy? You know, you're having the variance is also equally good. And moreover, you know, if you're doing an excited state, you could do an excited state separately from the other states. You know, your efficiency in sampling would be much better. Okay, so this is the variance, okay, the fluctuation of the energy, you know, sandwich on the wave function, and what has been done since the early work of Cyrus Omega. Now you can actually place here omega, I called it, which is just an estimate of your energy, which you lower as you're actually lowering your variance. You know, other functional to minimize the variance have been proposed, but this is really good enough. Okay. So what we can do, we can take our cyanide dye, small one. You can say, fine, now forget energy minimization. We do variance minimization. So ground state excited state, optimize the variance poof comes down nicely. Your energy also reaches a plateau. Okay, of course, your energy will not be the lowest energy because you're minimizing the variance and not the energy. And then you can compute your vertical excitation energy. And the two of them are, you know, whether I do energy minimization, variance minimization, they're very close. Okay, so which is great. Okay, so fantastic. And then you can say, fine, you know, now the previous wave function had 50 determinants. Now I go to 7,000 determinants. That's a better wave function and optimize everything, orbital, adjuster, and CI coefficients. And now, as I optimize the variance, I'm not showing here, the variance actually goes down for both states, you know, it's keeping going down nicely. And the ground state appears to be plateauing, and the excited state keeps growing. Okay, and therefore, you know, depending on where you stop, you might get the excitation energy you desire. Okay, you know, depending, I mean, you cannot really determine the excitation energy here, and we really try different optimizer, different functions for the variance, and it's really reproducible, this behavior. Okay. And as I said, you know, we're really optimizing all parameters. If you're doing just only, it wouldn't happen. Okay, so we're having some trouble. Okay, so this is problematic because it's surprising, because we know that the variance must have a minimum for the exact eigenstate, and these are really reasonable wave function with many parameters. And so, you know, if you go back to a situation of growing energy, you can say, fine, I show the variance, I go down, down, and down. I can do it, you know, with smaller error bars, okay, same behavior. And now I can run the optimization for an insane number of optimization steps, okay? I go to something like 3,500. It would never go as far, okay? And the energy keeps growing and finally settles to something which appears to be a higher eigenstate, okay? So it would seem that you actually cannot stay on the state you actually wish to stay, you know, which was, you know, the lowest actually in the symmetry class. Okay, it was an excited state, you know, but was still a ground state in its symmetry. Okay, so there were essentially no barrier or tiny barriers. Okay, to really understand, you know, better what's going on,
Claudia,
we build
just a few minutes left, so if you can wrap up.
I wrap it up. Okay, so just to rationalize this, you can build a very simple wave function with 13 parameters, you know, so 13 CI parameters, you get 13 eigenstates. You can start your optimization on the different states, and the variance of all of them converges to the same one, but you're having that the energy actually converges to the second stage. Okay, because, you know, the state with the lowest variance might not be the state you're interested in, and apparently, let's say the surface, you know, this parameter space has very little barrier. So we find that energy minimization is safer and more robust. Okay, So at the moment, and then I'm going to wrap it up. We are also looking into state specific, so you're optimizing the energy with some orthogonality constraint. We are doing it in one single run again, like, in the state average case. And we are applying to double excitation. So we are trying to go to either larger system that the coupled cluster can do, or system where coupled cluster fails. So this is a very simple molecule, but it's a double excitation. And with respect to full CI, coupled cluster can be off by 1 eV. Okay, and here BNC and DNC are both very good and very close to the full CI. Okay, so here is another one. Since the wave function is simple, again is a huge error at the level of coupled cluster, and here we are very close but not close enough. Okay, so we are still playing with our wave functions, and that's work in progress. Now, okay, so we don't have time, so summary for, otherwise I go over. So what I showed you is that here at the moment in QMC, we can really compute derivatives. We have a lot of optimization tools, for different circumstances, and we can really treat QMC as internally consistent, as self-consistent, okay? We have been working on building a protocol for excited stage, and we have been using, this automatic generation of wave function to keeping a balanced description of the states of interest. We are having accurate vertical excitation energy and optimal excited state geometries, and we are really trying to go to larger Cs. And of course, the problem will be that eventually CIPC will become too costly. Okay, so we're going to have to see how far we can push it, and also you expect that if the system becomes larger, the number of determinants will eventually have to grow, also depending on the excitation, depending on the problem you're interested in. Okay, and so you will probably hit a problem. Okay. Also, what I discussed is the energy minimization for excited states is robust in state average or state specific fashion, and the various minimization, if you're optimizing everything, can lose the target state. Okay, because you don't know a priori how your surface will look like, and there might not be any barriers. And now we are, as I said, we are playing more and more with energy minimization and, let's say, problems of troublesome for coupled cluster. And these are my collaborators. The two students are the one, Monica and Alice, are the one who have done most of the work. The postdoc are now implementing and playing with specific optimization, and these are my senior collaborators, Saverio Moroni at CISA, Anthony Semana in Toulouse, who is our CIPC expert, and a local colleague with whom I talk a lot, Wim Briels. And I thank you for your attention. Sorry, I was a bit late.
Thanks so much, Claudia. Thanks for the great talk. And as usual, we'll have a chance to take some questions. So please don't hold back putting questions in the chat. Let me ask a question to get things going. So Claudia, earlier in your talk, you showed an example where a small hydrocarbon had an excitation energy that was very dependent on the quality of the trial wave functions.
Oh, yeah.
It may have had a nitrogen or a phosphorus at the end. And I was just wondering,
Together here.
Yes, this is it, right? Do you have a sense of what it is chemically or electronically that's making this system difficult? Because we would like some sort of signpost for things to look.
Yeah, no, honestly, no. So it's very, actually, the silent dyes are also very different for time-dependent DFT, but coupled cluster gets it. It's a single reference. So I don't know. And, for example, like the CAS, we did, you do the smallest orbital, you do pi and sigma to sigma star, pi to pi star, you allow, therefore you allow sigma star, also you allow sigma pi correlation. Apparently, you need to go up. You see, to higher orbital. I find it very surprising. But that seems the case. So we have been trying to post-analyze, not just in this case, but we find it hard with the CIPC to. So at the beginning you fill up the lowest one, and then all of a sudden you shoot to very high orbitals, and and our chemical intuition is lost.
Thank you. A question from Gani Anaberdiev. In your experience, do you find DFT, say beta ellipse, orbitals to be the question is accurate enough for SIPSI calculations. So I think more
Well, okay,
generally
so we didn't do
what
really.
orbitals do you want to use?
Yeah, well, okay, so for the cyanine, when we did all the series, we tried Harpy Fock, we tried CAS. It doesn't seem to care so much, nor at the level of SIPSI, nor at the level of QMC, which is good. Okay, so that's the only case where we played, you know. So, you know, I must say also also with the other molecules, you know, there were some playing, you know, with how you build your CAS. It seems to be quite robust. Okay, so at the end of the day, whatever you use is going to give you a reasonable description of the lower orbitals, and after go figure what you get. And so it doesn't seem to matter so much overall. Anwar has a question.
Yes, so I'll just read this.
If I minimize the energy, if I reach convergence with a number of determinant of the single energy, I doubt if my answer is no, I don't think so. For sure, okay, now we haven't looked for this system, but for butadiene we looked, and at the variational level, it looked like to go down and down and down. Diffusion Monte Carlo was, of course, the slope was much less. But yeah, other properties than the energy. No, the forces were done. The forces. So the forces we repeated. No, density we didn't look, but we looked at the forces. So essentially, doing this relaxation using different target for your PT2 or your sigma, and double checking that you end up to the same minimum. And you have, you know, like, and the profile also reaching it was not so dissimilar. So no, so far only excitation energy and interatomic forces were checked. More work to be done. But I agree, it's a very good question, you know, other properties, yeah.
So
we hope the QMC cures it.
So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we should move on. So thank you again, Claudia, for the great talk.
Thank you. I stop sharing.
Our second speaker is Professor Ken Ataca from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He joined the physics department about 4 years ago, I think, after postdocs at MIT and Brown. And his group focuses on material simulation spanning multiple length and timescales for next generation device and green energy applications. And so today he's going to tell us about some applications of QMC in these areas. So Ken, take it away.
Okay, thanks for inviting me for the QMC workshop. Today I will be let me go to this screen. I will mention give very brief introduction to computational methodologies that we used here, and I'm going to discuss 4 of our studies that include quantum Monte Carlo. Those are the 2D gallium selenide and its alloying structures, and then I will move on to more correlated structure, manganese dioxide here, and then I will discuss a little bit about the lithium-air battery cathode materials that we are trying to investigate using quantum Monte Carlo. So a very brief computational methodology. Generally love using DFT methods here, and what it's doing is literally making this many body electron interactions to some kind of a DFT electron density and DFT functional, and literally the accuracy depends on the functional that you are literally going to use, and there are some drawbacks of these, and since the van der Waals interactions are not totally correct here, and when you have systems with strongly localized and correlated electrons, we have some problems calculating the energetics of those as well, and still we have main problem is the band gap problem, how we are going to calculate the accurate electric and optical band gap of these the materials using DFT. And there are some proposed solutions to this, including many body perturbation theories, and for example, we can just do the DFT calculation and we are not going to get accurate energetics and the band structures, and in order to correct the electronic band gap of the material, we can do GW corrections here, but still we are not including the effects of exosonic effects in our materials. So then we can, on top, we can do this BSC Bethe-Salpeter equation on top of the GW and get an idea about this, the optical gap of the material as well. But still, you are functional dependent here. So how are we going to calculate the properties? Cause we are going to detect the quasi-particle gaps using GW approximation, and we can get the optical gap of the material using the BSE. We are going to focus on the first peak in the absorption spectrum using BSE calculations, and we literally can calculate the exciton binding energy by taking the difference of the GW gap and the optical gap here. But I mean, we can go more further into the stochastic methods, and we are going to use diffusion Monte Carlo for calculating these energies. And this is a literally review slide, and you have seen way more detailed slides about the diffusion Monte Carlo here as well. So what we are going to focus on here is that we have the time step errors and finite size effect errors here, which we can easily overcome by extrapolating our results. But the only thing is the fixed node approximation, and we have to get a good nodal surface from DFT calculations. And this is not a methodology, so this is how we are handling the alloying work. So in nature, not everything is in pristine condition. You can have defects, you can have doping effects in your materials. So how we are literally bridging these impurities to mesoscale simulations is we are using cluster expansion here. So what we are doing is literally we are getting small clusters and we are calculating the energetics of it. This can be any computational methodology. This can be DFT or MD or QMC as well. And then we are literally statistically trying to find the phase diagram at the end. And this is how we are simulating alloys in our simulations. So let's move on to the materials application. So first of all, we focus on two-dimensional gallium selenide. So why this material is important? It's a semiconductor. It's useful for photovoltaics and water splitting applications. And the other thing is that we have a good experimental information about this material. We know the optical gap, we know the electronic gap, we know the lattice parameters as well. So it's a very nice system that we can use QMC to benchmark with the experimental data, because when you start using DFT with different functionals, you will get gazillion of different results based on your functional. So again, we have the quasi-particle gap 3.5 eV on graphene substrate, and we have the optical gap 3.3 on silicon dioxide substrate, and we do have the experimental lattice parameter as well. So that's a good sign that we can benchmark our QMC calculations as well. And the other important point here is that its alloys are synthesized as well. So we can literally test our procedure for working on the alloys using quantum Monte Carlo as well. So first thing first, what we have done, we have relaxed our geometry. We are trying to find the optimal lattice constant here. So when we just do plain DFT, just PB scan or LDA here, they are, all over the place, and we have the experimental data as well. It is 3.74. But when we use these wave functions generating from different functionals, and when we have do quantum Monte Carlo on top of those, what we are converging is closer to a very closer to the experimental value. So this is a good sign. It shows the power of DMC, that we are literally not getting that much of effects of the functional that we are starting from. And from now on, we are going to use scan geometry, scan wave function geometry on top of that. So let's move on to the next slide. So the next thing that we focused on is literally, let's calculate the electronic properties of this one. So electronic gap. So what we are seeing here is that we calculate the same geometry, but with different functionals and different pseudopotentials. So here you are seeing that this is the red one is WASP electronic gap. And what we are seeing is that literally this is an indirect material, direct material. And similarly, when we have done with the BFT pseudopotential and again PBE functional, we are literally seeing that the gap is significantly changing. I mean, here at the gamma point, and we are literally have a gap between gamma and M here. And when we just literally do GW on top of the DFT POW, we are literally getting a direct gap from an indirect situation. So its DFT results are all over the place. So what we have done is we literally run DMC simulations, and we did literally excite the system at the DMC level. So we started with the ground state wave function from DMC from DFT, and we literally excite at the DMC level. And so what we have found after all is that, so the important thing is that experimentally it's stated that this is an indirect gap material. So if you literally use just DFT approximation here, you are seeing that, the values are all over the place. It's nowhere closer to the experimental value. And there's some of them predicts that it's a direct gap, some of them predicts it's an indirect gap. So when we look at the GW approximations, even both of the GW approximations is claiming that this is a direct gap, which is not consistent with the experimental results. And with the DMC results, we find that it's an indirect gap band, and we have the gap is on the order of 3.7 EV, which is an experimental reported value is on the order of 3.5. But again, this is on top of a substrate, graphene substrate, and experimental, they reported that the exciton binding energy is very minor. So we are talking about things around 50 milli eV. But when we do the exciton binding energies with the GW-BSC approximation, we are literally finding the exciton binding energies on the order of 200 milli EVs, which is again inconsistent with the experimental stuff. But when we do it at the DMC level, we find literally the upper bound is 80 milli EV for exciton binding energy. So this is a nice example that, hey, we can use quantum Monte Carlo methodology for modeling 2D materials. So we are literally getting very close to the experimental value, and we can literally just use this methodology for further investigating materials. So let's move on to the next research that we have done. So this is literally recently published in JCP here. You can find the DOE here. And so what we have done, again, we have an experimental data available for gallium selenide and gallium sulfide layers. So when you do this alloying transition at the DFT level, what we are seeing is that this is not energetically favorable. So this means that it is literally, you are not going to observe the alloy structure at the ground state, but experimentally we have the data, so there is something wrong with it. And the other thing you are seeing is that, let's look at the coloring here. This coloring represents the band gap of the structure. So as you are tuning the literally sulfide concentration in your gallium selenide, you are literally tuning the gap of the material as well. So we have a case that we have an evidence that this is experimentally available, and we have a case DFT is failing here. So can we use quantum Monte Carlo here? So guys, all of these points are DFT calculations. So with DFT, this thing is very easy to do, but can we do quantum Monte Carlo? So we are talking about two orders of magnitude expensive methodology to do these kind of calculations. So what we have done is, so we get this energy diagram here versus the concentration, and we focused on lowest energy states that we get from DFT, and this is an extreme case. So this is the Janus structure. A is the Janus structure here. So where one side is literally selenide, the other side is sulfide, and we have the lowest energy cases at different concentrations. So their geometries are represented here. So when you look at this one, chemically, the Janus structure is the very different one from the other cases here. And we get another structure here. So it's literally this structure is the smallest weakness that the cell that has the smallest weakness radius here. So why is this important? So it is literally important for our just sort of optimization stuff. So how can we make this alloying search more computationally efficient? So what we have done is literally we have looked at just sort of sharing here. So we have optimized all just sort of parameters individually at each concentration. So we have the optimized just rows at each point, and then we swap the just row parameters or optimize just row parameters with the other geometries as well. So what we have found is that at the DMC level, so our errors are minimal. So we are talking about milli-EV errors here, and we are seeing that at the DMC level, just row literally switching just row parameters will not affect our final result at the DMC level. So what we have proposed is that, hey, let's calculate the just rows at one structure with the possible lowest possible computational cost and literally use it for other structures as well. So literally just run DMC calculations for all other stuff. But we have to check a few stuff here. So in order to just literally do this swapping just row from swapping. So we have checked the just row sensitivity of the material. So it's literally how the chemical environment is changing with different alloying concentrations here. And literally you can find the details about this just row sensitivity in these two-sided papers here. So, and what we have found is that literally our sensitivity is very low. So which means that we can use this just row swapping in our alloying model. So when we do that, so I'm literally presenting you here two different QMC values. So one is literally when we use the self just row, and the other one is when we use the smaller cell weakness size just row parameter here. And literally the green ones are the DFT values. So what we are seeing here is that in order to be energetically favorable, our structure, it has to lie below this 0 EV. So when we just do the DFT calculation, we are not finding it. But when we are literally doing QMC calculations, we are seeing that there is literally a probability that these structures are energetically favorable, which is again consistent with the experimental data. So this is from a materials perspective, so that we literally correct some kind of the mismatch in the DFT scale. But the other important thing is that, so let's look at the cost analysis of this method. So literally this is how much it costs for us to literally calculate the optimizer just row parameters here in literally a DMC calculation, and this in a BMC calculation, and this is how it would cost us to run DMC calculation with a certain preset convergence criteria. Here, what we are seeing that actually just row optimization is taking 1/4 of the computational power. So literally by just using this just row sharing approach, we can literally cut computational costs by 1/4, and literally we are just going to calculate just row factors for one case, and literally we can literally swap those just row parameters for the other proposed case as well. So we are from now on, we are just going to run DMC calculations. So this is another work that we have done on two-dimensional materials. So
and just a few minutes.
Okay. So okay, then the other thing that we have worked on is the manganese oxide. In this case, we have the correlated system. So I propose that TNH phase of these materials can be made stable literally almost 10 years ago. And then afterwards, we have seen computational works and even experimental works on this material as well. So, people started focusing on it because it's a semiconductor and it's a ferromagnetic structure in its T phase. But again, when we do use different functionals and different U corrections here, and we are seeing that the energy difference between ferromagnetic and AFM antiferromagnetic cases literally all over the place. So how can we find it accurately, and how we can predict the Curie temperature of this material accurately with the experimental method? So again, we are trying to find a way how to use quantum Monte Carlo just to predict the accurate U parameter. So first of all, what we have done is we have run QMC calculations on 36 atom supercells of this one, and literally try to predict the lowest energy case where, and we found that the U parameter is somewhere in between 2.4 and 2.5 T. Okay, so we have a rough estimate of this U value that we can use in the DFT calculations, and then we put this in our Hamiltonian, magnetic Hamiltonian. So we have the easy axis of single ion anisotropy, we have the Heisenberg exchange, and we have the anisotropic symmetric exchange parameters here. But the DFT the QMC calculations that we are doing does not include the spin orbit coupling interactions here. So right now we determined the J parameter just by using these two. So we have 4 cases here. Either a manganese atoms are coupled with ferromagnetically and antiferromagnetically, and we literally focus the easy of axis of magnetization in the z-axis, which is perpendicular to 2-dimensional material, or in plane. We can take it as x here. So we determined the J parameter using quantum Monte Carlo here, and what we are seeing right now here is that, we are having a plateau on the J parameter here as well with the QMC. And then when we move on to the other D, so D and lambda parameter here, so we have done DFT calculations using VASP and PAV here at different easy axes and literally magnetic orientations as well. So they have a minor contribution here. And at the end, what we conclude is that when we choose the accurate U value that we calculate from quantum Monte Carlo, the Curie temperature is on the order of 20 to 25 degrees, which is consistent with the experiments. But what we are generally seeing in a regular PB calculation is that it is literally varying, which is with the number that you choose for the U calculation. So there is a question here. Do you know if hidden functions like HSC gives better nodal surface for the trial wave function in QMC for more accurate band gap calculations? So we just run, for the gap calculations, we just use PB wave functions generated at the PB level. We didn't check. We have the LDA and scan wave functions as well, but we didn't check the HSC with the HSC wave functions. So for band gap calculations in our previous work, we just tried LDA, scan, and PB, but we didn't try HSC. So right now, I don't have a clear answer for that question. Okay, let's continue with this work. So we also focus on the spin difference, how spin difference is changing on the atoms here as well. We have the DMC results and we have the U-dependent PBE results as well. And seriously, what we are seeing is that, there's a similar trend on the manganese part, but on the oxygen part, we have very different results with varying PBE calculations. So let's move on to the last part. So I'm sorry, I'm rushing a little bit here. So
Karen, you just got a minute or two, otherwise it run into too much time trouble. So you're judge.
Okay, so last thing we are focusing on is metal air battery. So lithium air battery here. So why is that? It has a higher capacity here. So how we can, so currently we are using lithium ion here, but if we can manage to use lithium air, it's a very comparable energy density to gasoline. So the important thing is that we have the intermediate states as lithium superoxide and lithium peroxide here. So this is a nice case study for quantum Monte Carlo because we have a varying oxidation states of a material, which we know that DFT should fail. I mean, DFT will fail here. And the other thing is that we have different atomic structures for lithium superoxides and lithium peroxides here. So we need a benchmarking tool for experimentalists to validate. And in the literature, we have the experimental data and the DFT data, which is literally way off between each other. Again, we have the varying band gap of these materials as well. So what we have done, we literally run QMC calculations, do all time step and finite size extrapolations here, and literally this plot shows literally benchmark the quantum Monte Carlo result, how the gap and how the lattice parameters versus the formation energy changing with respect to quantum Monte Carlo results here. So we are seeing that depending on the functional you start and the geometry, again, it's all over the place. We cannot find a unique answer. But when we use quantum Monte Carlo here, what we are seeing that, hey, we are literally having, seeing that we have to be in the lithium peroxide region in order to have this charging, discharging process to happen. So we are nowhere in the superoxide regions because there's a huge energy difference. And literally, we also predicted that, hey, Fehr structure is energetically favorable in these cases. Because the other floppy structure, if we cannot have a recycle, so charging, discharging in the floppy structure, so there are experiment evidence of that. And so what we have done with QMC here is that even though we don't have a unique answer for different functionals with DFT, we literally predict the energetic, the lowest magnetic structure and atomic structure of lithium peroxide, lithium superoxide structures. And this is literally gives us an idea about even the operating voltage at some point of the lithium air battery. So as a summary, what we can use is we can literally use QMC as a benchmarking tool for experimental validation. And literally, we can not only use QMC to calculate band caps or energy formation energies, we can literally use them for alloying instances as well. And as the spin-orbit coupling implemented in QMC PEC, and as we have relativistic potentials as well, we have more power to use quantum Monte Carlo for accurate calculations of 2D materials as well. So I want to thank my students. So Daniel Vines literally worked on two-dimensional materials work presented here, and Gracie is literally working on the lithium air battery project. And I want to thank Kayan Sarıtaş as well here. So he is also helping us a lot with the quantum Monte Carlo stuff. And thanks for listening, guys. This was a very, fast way of presenting what we are doing in our group.
Thanks so much for the very interesting presentation, Cam. Much appreciated. So of course, the floor is open for questions. I have one. I don't see any additional from the audience just yet. But I've got a similar question for you to what I asked Claudia. And this is in the gallium selenium system. You pointed out the difficulties and the sensitivities with methodology and about the direct and indirect gap nature of the material. And I think this is very interesting and maybe surprising to some parts of the electronic structure community. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts, any hints as to what it is about the electronic structure or maybe the geometry, the combination of those, that makes this system so tricky.
So there's again, there is a competing gap here, and the gamma gamma and gamma m. And when we literally do the projected density of states at these points, we are seeing that literally this conduction band is all about the stuff in the chalcogen atoms here. So literally what is failing at the DFT wise here is what is literally significantly changing at the DFT wise is I mean, from top of my head, I cannot tell right now what, I mean, we should, I mean, focus more into this stuff.
Okay. And one question, I think we'll have this as the last question and move on. And this is from Joshua Townsend. And I assume it's about the last part of your talk. Regarding the magnetic structures, did you explore various orderings in the antiferromagnetic state, or is this known experimentally?
So, I mean, I'm hoping that this is about the lithium air work here. So in this case, we just consider for each considerations, we have 4 different magnetic ordering here. So what we have done is that literally calculate the energetics of these 4. So one ferromagnetic ordering and 3 different AFM ordering here. So we did calculate those energetics as well, and then literally proceed with the lowest energy case. So is this known experimentally? So the only reported thing is that these are magnetic. So this is what we have found in the literature. So we just literally look at it. So are these ferromagnetic or AFM cases? So I mean, we just found that these are ferromagnetic after the QMC calculations.
There's a note to say thanks in the chat. So thanks again, Can. Appreciate the very interesting talk. Let's now move on to our 3rd speaker. So Can, you need to stop sharing.
So on the, but this is stop share. Is it?
Hopefully you can share your slides.
Yes.
Excellent. So we see the slides full screen. So our 3rd speaker is Yueqing Chang, who's a graduate student in Professor Lucas Wagner's group at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And today she will tell us about her work that I think is actually as an important direction as the previous talks, which is making a connection to models and deriving model Hamiltonians from these many-body methods. Thanks very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Ken, for inviting me to give this talk. So my current research focuses on deriving accurate model Hamiltonians using quantum Monte Carlo for materials with multiple interactions, interplay in its low energy physics. And so that we can use this model Hamiltonians to disentangle these interaction channels and study the mechanisms of the emergent phenomena or phase transitions. So today for my talk, I would like to give a tutorial-like talk about how we actually do this for a specific system, for a simple 4-atom hydrogen chain. So to begin with, let's ask ourselves this question: why do we want to derive model Hamiltonians? So a simple answer would be models provide us with simple descriptions of the low energy physics for condensed matter systems. These model Hamiltonians could be like a Haber model for the copper-oxygen plane in cuprates, or it could be a tight binding model formed out of the pi bands of the carbon atoms in a graphene. So as computational scientists, we are all very familiar with this many-body ab initio Hamiltonian. For the previous talks, we've learned how to compute the ground state wave functions for this many-body Hamiltonian. And from Claudia's talk, we've learned how to compute the excited states using QMC. So the eigenstates of this ab-initio Hamiltonian really form the full Hilbert space of our system. And this full Hilbert space contains many of these high energy parts, which are impactful to track down and also unnecessary for us to understand the low energy physics. What we really care about is just the low energy subspace that is spanned by the first few eigenstates. And the effective model Hamiltonian is designed to accurately describe this low energy subspace. Here, I'm just writing down a general form, a general two-body model Hamiltonian for this low energy subspace. So it takes this Ci dagger Cj terms and also Ci dagger Cj Ck Cj dagger Ck Cl terms, which are the two-body terms. Of course, you can even have higher order terms for more complex systems. And for today's talk, I would like to introduce you step by step how we derive this effective model Hamiltonian by solving these many-body ab-initio Hamiltonian using QMC, and how we build this large data set for the low energy subspace. I want to demonstrate this procedure in the simple hydrogen chains. Let's refresh our memories about these hydrogen chains. So it has two known limits. One is the small bond length limit, where the atoms are very close and electrons are free to move between the sides. So the system appears to be a conducting state. And as we stretch the bond length, the atoms begin to go further apart, and as it approaches the atomic limit, the electrons tend to be localized on each side, so that the system becomes a model insulator. At a bond length close to 1.4, we know that there's a metal to insulator transition. A natural question to ask is that what is the minimal model that can explain this metal insulator transition for hydrogen chains as it approaches the thermodynamic limit? Of course, we know that a single band Hilbert model cannot do this job. So one may say that maybe we can add in long range hoppings or long range interactions. Or another scenario might be we need multiple bands for the metallic state, which is suggested by this paper. The author suggested that it is the overlap between the 1s and 2s 2p bands in the metallic state that gives rise to this transition. These two scenarios are not mutually exclusive, so maybe we also need both of them in order to explain this metal insulator transition, or maybe neither of them can work. Maybe we need even higher order terms, or it is really hard for us to write down a sparse Hamiltonian in this metallic region using a localized basis. To start with, I want to simplify this problem by just looking at a very, very simple 4 hydrogen atom chain, which is equally spaced with open boundary conditions. And here I'm using effective core potential CCCP with a triple zeta basis. And I'm going to divide my talk into 2 sections. The first section, I will tell you how we find the eigenstates using quantum Monte Carlo and how we analyze these eigenstates so that we have a rough understanding of the low energy physics for the system. And the second part, I will tell you how we gather the large data set for the energies and one-body density, two-body density matrices for the sample wave functions on this low energy subspace, and how we downfold this large data set to a model Hamiltonian. So to start with, let's start from obtaining a ground state wave function. You can choose any ansatz that you know and love, but here I started from a state averaged CAS-SCF 44 trial wave function and then multiplied with a gestural factor. And then I use variational Monte Carlo to optimize its molecular orbital coefficients, CI coefficients, and gestural factor parameters to get a better approximation for the ground state wave function psi naught. And after I obtained this ground state wave function, I began to get all these low energy excited state wave functions using a method called orthogonal optimization And of course, you can also use Claudia's method to get these excited state wave functions. So this orthogonal optimization method is a way to minimize the energy of a given trial wave function with the constraint that it has zero overlap with all the low energy eigenstates. On the right-hand side here, I'm just showing you the optimization process of my excited states. So here, different colors stands for one excited state wave function. You can see that their energy begins to lower down. And this one is the energy for the ground state. And also I'm showing the overlap of the first excited state with the ground state. You can see that as the optimization moves on, this overlap also goes to zero. So that we have obtained all the low energy eigenstates that we want to be included in the low energy subspace. And the next step is to analyze these eigenstates. So we begin by looking at these molecular orbital occupations for different bond lengths. So here I'm just showing you the molecular orbital occupations for the first 4 orbitals. And the 3 panels are R equals 0.8, 1.8, and 3. The y-axis is the indices for the eigenstates from the ground state to the 5th excited states. And the colors here just stand for the MO occupations from 0 to 2. So you can see that for R equals 0.8, the system is weakly correlated in a sense that almost all the occupations are integers 0, 1, or 2. So that the eigenstates are well represented by 1 or 2 determinants. And then for R equals 1.8, you begin to see some non-integer numbers. And for R equals 3, you see that almost all the occupation numbers are non-integers. This is a sign of saying that eigenstates may contain many determinants and the system is strongly correlated. So now that we have obtained roughly an understanding about how the system behaves for its low energy eigenstates, let's move on to generating the data set that we need for downfolding the model. So here, I want to start by introducing this notion of a small basis CI dagger. We need to find a small basis CI dagger that conserves the trace of the one body density matrix. Later on, we may do rotations within this small basis to get a localized basis for our model Hamiltonian. But for now, let's just use a truncated molecular orbital basis, which is delocalized in real space. And here for this 4-atom system, I'm using the first 4 molecular orbitals such that the trace, and also we want to check that the trace of the one body reduced density matrix computed using this truncated MO basis equals to the total number of electrons. And after we have determined what truncated basis to use, we can use this basis to generate the energies and reduced density matrices for the sampled wave functions on the low energy subspace. These sampled wave functions can be the linear superpositions of the first few eigenstates. For my example here, I'm using the first 6 eigenstates. And in the data set, we compute these energies using BMC and one body reduced density matrices and elements and 2-body density reduced density matrices, because later on we want to also include the 2-body terms in our model. And on the right-hand side here, I'm just showing you a slice of the data set that we generate. For each R, we sampled about 800 wave functions. Here, I'm showing you the trace of the one-body density matrix using the first 4 MOs versus the VMC energies for all my sampled wave functions and also the eigenstates for R equals 1.8. You can see that the trace of OBDMs are always close to 4 for all my sample wave functions using this first 4 MOs. And the energies are sort of in between the extremes of these eigenstates. And the eigenstates and all these sampled wave functions has an energy span from minus 61 eV to about minus 49 eV. And another slice of the data set is the OBDMs. here I'm reusing this plot from last slide. This is the diagonals of the one-body density matrices. And of course, you can also have two-body density matrices, which are hard to visualize over here. Okay, now that we have already got our data set, which includes the energies and reduced density matrices, how do we actually downfold to a model? Let me give you an example for R equals 1.2. This is a bond length that's very close to the weakly interacting regime. But we are using a localized orbitals of the first 4 molecular orbitals. This is a rotation of the first 4 molecular orbitals. For those of you who are more advanced, this is intrinsic atomic orbitals. So you can take them as if they are just S-like orbitals localized on each side. And the descriptors that we are using here are just the hopping, the nearest neighbor hoppings, second nearest neighbor hoppings, and third nearest neighbor hoppings, and also the descriptor for the on-site repulsion U. This is the double occupancy, and descriptor for V, which is the product of the nearest neighbor occupancies. And let's first start from a very simple T1 model that we know and love from solid state physics class. Interestingly, so we see that this T1 model is not too bad for the system. You can see that here I'm just plotting the predicted energies versus the VMC energies for all my sampled wave functions. T1 model only includes this simple T1 hopping term plus a constant, which I call it E lattice. And you can see that at low energy, at the low energy regime, this model actually performs pretty well, and you see some deviations on the higher energies. And R square is fairly good with 1 EV root mean square error, given that we have such a large energy span. But how do we actually improve this model if we want to get a better fitting? So we begin with looking at the residual of the T1 model and see how it correlates with the rest of the descriptors. Here I'm just plotting the residual of T1 only model versus the descriptor of T2, T3, U, and V. We can see that it correlates mostly with the D of T2. So the next step is to include the T2 term into our model. So we can see that now all these data points begin to come closer to this line. It's a sign of saying that the model is a better fitting compared with the T1 only model. And you can see that R square is also improved with a smaller root mean square error. And we can move on to improve this model more. So we look at the residual of the T1 plus T2 model and see how it correlates with the rest of the descriptors. We see that it correlates the most with D of U. So then we move on to adding a U term into our model. So now this is our model, which includes T1 plus T2 plus U and a constant. And we can see that almost all the data points can be very well described by the model. We've got a fairly good R square with a fairly small root mean square error compared with the large 13 eV energy range of my sample wave functions. So now we are good. For our hydrogen chain 4 system, the best model actually depends on the bond length R. So in our study, we find that for all the R greater than 1.2, we can always downfold to a sparse Hamiltonian using a localized basis, which is a rotation of the first 4 molecular orbitals. And the best model is different for different Rs. And on the right-hand side, I have summarized the change of this parameter value versus the bond length. And here we can see that the on-site repulsion U increases with the bond length R, and T1 decreases its absolute value with the bond length R, which is reasonable. It's implying that as we stretch the chain, the electrons tend to be more localized around each side. And T3, interestingly, T2 changes its sign at R equals 1.8. And for larger bond length, T3 decreases in its value and eventually comes down to 0. And this E lattice, which is a constant in our model, it could be attributed as the energy that is contributed by the ions in the system. So it decreases in its value. It's also reasonable because as we stretch the bond length, the ions become further apart resulting in a smaller Coulomb repulsion. So what can we do after we've obtained this model? One way of looking at it is to compute the energy contributions of the different terms by solving this model Hamiltonians using full CI. So here I have grouped my T1, T2, T3 terms into this big hopping term, and this is the on-site interaction as well as the E lattice. Here I'm just plotting on-site interaction, hopping, and E lattice versus the bond length. And also you can check out the ground state energy computed from the model and also from the VMC. So you can see that as R increases, this on-site interaction appears to be not increasing much. This is because although the on-site repulsion parameter U increases, the ground state double occupancy actually decreases as R increases. So the overall contribution from the on-site interaction does not increase much as we expect. And the next step is to move on to larger systems and extrapolate to thermodynamic limit. As we go to the thermodynamic limit, we are going to make the same figure and study how the different terms in this Hamiltonian contribute to the order parameter of a metal insulator transition. Or we may find that we need to adding even higher order terms into this Hamiltonian in order to capture that metal insulator transition. Okay, to summarize, for today's talk, I've shown you step by step how we derive the model Hamiltonians using quantum Monte Carlo. We begin with using quantum Monte Carlo to find and analyze the eigenstates so that we understand roughly how the system behaves in its low energy. And then we sample the low energy subspace by doing linear superpositions of the eigenstates. We find that using a small MO basis is good enough for describing all these sampled states. And then we compress the full Hilbert space to this low energy subspace and downfold to a model Hamiltonian. And later on, we find that the best model really depends on the bond length of my system. And future work that is still in progress is that we are trying to extrapolate to the thermodynamic limit and try to disentangle the different interaction channels to see what is the actual necessary term that generates the metal to insulator transition. And one takeaway message for this method is that with this framework based on QMC, we can derive model Hamiltonians, treating all the one-body and two-body terms on the same footing without any double counting error as introduced in the RPA methods. And in the future, we expect to see more of the application of this framework applied to more complicated systems in order to elucidate the mechanisms behind those phase transitions and emergent phenomena. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and pause for questions.
Thanks so much, Yueqing, for a great talk. So the floor is open for questions. Let me start by asking a question along the lines of what you hinted at the end of your summary.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how scalable you feel this current approach is, either to larger chains or to molecular systems or even materials.
That is a very good question. So so for my system, currently it's just a 4-atom chain, and I'm using CAS SCF, state average CAS SCF 44. And the total number of eigenstates that I get out of that is 36. And of course, you can just include all those numbers, all those eigenstates when you fit the model. But as you go to longer chains, that number is going to scale exponentially with the size of the chain. So our plan is to, for the next step, is to like increase gradually the number of eigenstates we include when we do this, when we apply this downfolding framework, so that we can actually obtain the dependence of, for example, the U on the energy span of my low energy subspace. This is very similar to the dependence of U with the frequency, for example, in the CRPA method. Yes.
Thank you. So I don't see any more questions. I'll presume to ask a second one in that case, which is related. And that is, we know that for many model Hamiltonians, there's a few quite large parameters describing the dominant interactions. And then after that, there's a sea of smaller ones as we go to larger distances, for example. And so do you have a sense of what are going to be practical to get, either in terms of sort of energy scale or for a particular complexity of system?
Another very interesting question that I don't know an answer at the top of my head, but I think it really depends on the system that we are interested in, and also the low energy physics that we want to describe. Yeah, for example, like for systems like twisted bilayer graphene that we are currently working on, what we really care about is just like the flat bands near the Fermi level. So so naively, one would expect to derive a model that only includes, one would start from deriving a model that only includes those flat bands. But if that is not enough, I think maybe the next step is to explore like higher energy eigenstates and see if it can capture the real physics. Or maybe one can explore like, one can see if we can write down the Hamiltonian with more terms, with more higher order terms, or longer range interactions, for example. Yeah, it really depends on the system that we are looking at and also the physics that we want to describe.
Yeah, I agree. I think also ultimately you've got a scheme here where you could test some of these choices by simply trying a lot more complex model eventually, as you showed.
Yes,
so that's a great strength.
Yes.
So I don't see any additional questions in the chat. So I think we'll wrap up here, and I'd like to give a final virtual applause and thanks to our speakers, Claudia, Ken, and Yueqing, for their talks, much appreciated. And then thanks all for joining, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week.